Chapter 2976. When he ate the food there was no expression on his face. He was very numb. He felt that what he ate wasn't food but the past between him and Qin. Whether he loved her or hated her, she had forgotten everything in the past. She didn't even like to eat her favorite food anymore. Lan Yu held his forehead and laughed, feeling like a fool. He finished the paella in a daze, made her noodles for her and brought them upstairs. However, Qin was already asleep. Her fair face was turned sideways and half of her face was covered by her brown hair. She was very beautiful, especially when she was lying there. It was natural and feminine. Those photos of men in the past now looked more like fashion blockbusters, but the naturalness couldn't be imitated by those old farts, because it was the truth that was engraved in her bones. Lan Yu held the plate of food and looked at it quietly for a long time. Finally he took it downstairs and poured it into the trash can. He didn't go up immediately but sat alone by the window and smoked quietly. He also knew that he had smoked a little too much recently and it was a little fierce, but he couldn't care less. Getting it seemed to make him feel more empty than not getting it. He played with the lighter in his hand and after a while he took out his phone and found her photos. He had deleted them last time but he could find them in the trash can. He looked at them quietly, watching them at their best. At that time she quite liked paella. He remembered that when he went home that night his mother arranged for him to meet Huang Xia, and when he came back, Qin threw a big temper. At that time she still cared about him even if she didn't love him. Lan Yu took a deep breath and called his father. In the middle of the night Mr. Lan picked up after only 2 rings. Lan Yu. Mr. Lan's voice was a little hoarse. Lan Yu said faintly and bitterly, "Dad, you're not asleep?" Mr. Lan nodded. "I heard something from your Uncle Su so I couldn't sleep at night. Taking 2 sleeping pills didn't help." Lan Yu didn't say anything. Mr. Lan thought for a moment and asked, "You've broken up with Lu Wei, haven't you?" After he finished asking he fell into silence. Lan Yu didn't reply directly. Instead he extinguished the cigarette butt and said indifferently, "I came back for a bit." Mr. Lan was about to object, but Lan Yu had already hung up. On the other side Father Lan sighed softly. From what old Su meant, she was at Lan Yu's place. They had just gotten married and they were already leaving her at home in the middle of the night. How could that be? It's been a long time since the two of them chatted. Lan Yu hung up the phone and went upstairs to change without disturbing Qin. When he went out he drove a sapphire blue Lamborghini and arrived at Mr. Lan's residence in 10 minutes. When he got off the car and walked in, the living room was brightly lit. It was obvious that his father couldn't sleep and went downstairs. Lan Yu walked in. The tea was already brewed on the coffee table. He sat down and took a sip. Mr. Lan asked softly, "Where is Qin?" Faced with such a straightforward question from his father, Lan Yu smiled and lit a cigarette before saying calmly, "She's asleep." Seeing his son smoke so skillfully, Mr. Lan was a little dissatisfied. "Look at what you've been smoking recently. You smell like smoke. Would a picky girl like Qin be willing to live with you? Besides, you're not young anymore. If you get married you should have a child early. Your mother will be comforted if she knows." Lan Yu frowned. "I don't plan to have children." Chapter 2977. Seeing that his son wanted to refute, he snorted coldly, "Are you not convinced? Do you think that you can legally sleep with a woman with a marriage certificate?" "Lan Yu, it depends on whether she is willing or not." "That." Lan Yu flicked the cigarette ash. "If you want a grandson, it depends on whether Qin is willing or not. As far as I know, she is willing to sleep with me, but she has to use a condom." He said it so openly that Mr. Lan's old face turned red. He coughed softly. "In the era of your mother and I, if a woman is willing to sleep with a man, it means that she is willing to have children with a man." Lan Yu couldn't help but laugh. "Dad, times have changed." Mr. Lan snorted. "What's different? It's you who don't want to have children, right?" Lan Yu was silent for a moment and then slowly said, "I haven't thought about it yet." As soon as he said that, Mr. Lan was very angry. He patted the table and the tea on the table shook. "You don't want to have children. You just want to maintain the marriage for a period of time. Lan Yu, this is not revenge on Qin, this is torture yourself." Mr. Lan closed his eyes. "I didn't think highly of Lu Wei before because I could see that you couldn't let go of Qin. So I didn't say a word about you breaking off the engagement with Lu Wei, but I opposed your marriage with Qin in a hurry." Lan Yu didn't say anything but just lit another cigarette. After smoking one he looked up. Mr. Lan's eyes met with his. Mr. Lan would never forget Lan Yu's expression at this time. That kind of cautiousness with despair and a touch of desire. Lan Yu's voice was hoarse. Dad, I can't resist. If she didn't come back, I might marry Lu Wei or a woman like Lu Wei and have children. But she came back and appeared in front of me. I couldn't refuse. Mr. Lan looked at his son and sighed softly. I think that even if you get married, as long as she comes back, you will divorce regardless of anything. Lan Yu frowned but did not deny it. What else was there to say? How could her son be so disappointing? He had set his sights on a woman. Whether it was love or hate, it was all for this woman. Papa Lan sighed. Lan Yu, follow me. He used to have a girl he liked very much. Of course, it was not Lan Yu's mother. They had a wonderful time together, but they parted ways. He wanted to go back and find her, but he didn't have the courage. Just like that, he missed out on her for the rest of his life. It wasn't that he regretted it, it was just a pity. Lan Yu. Mr. Lan patted him on the shoulder. Think about it carefully. Do you like her more or hate her more after marrying her? Then you'll know what to do. Lan Yu looked at his father, speechless. It's getting late, I also need to rest. My old bones really can't hold on any longer. Mr. Lan smiled bitterly. I've been in poor health these years. I've been thinking about when I'll meet your mother. I'm afraid that she won't be there when I go down. Lan Yu was a little sad. The gloom from 3 years ago surged up and filled his mind. Naturally, he also thought of the unpleasant meeting with Chen in France. Thinking about it, he smoked a cigarette fiercely, feeling indescribably uncomfortable. Mr. Lan stood up. If you're serious, bring her back for dinner when you have time. What's the point of being unclear? Besides, you have to worry about the Chen family and the Tang family. As the former CEO of Grand U, Mr. Lan's worries were not unreasonable. Chapter 2978. It wouldn't be difficult for Jia Boyi to work together to deal with Junyu, but Father Lan felt that it was too risky for a woman. He hoped that his son could live a stable and good life. Lan Yu understood what he meant and said in a low voice, Dad, I know what I'm doing. Father Lan raised his voice slightly. Do you think I don't know that you secretly worked with New York to suppress the Rome Corporation just for today? Lan Yu looked worried. Dad. You just didn't expect Chen to come back, which is what you want. Father Lan snorted. You should use your charm to conquer women. What's the use of threatening a woman? Lan Yu sighed. Do you think she hasn't seen a lot of beautiful men? There were too many beautiful men in the Chen family, the Tang family, and the fashion industry. She was probably immune to good-looking men. Father Lan nodded in agreement and said in a gloating tone, That's true. It seems that you're not in a good situation, son. Why don't you just let her get pregnant? You'll have to worry about the child if you want to leave in the future, right? Lan Yu looked at his father and didn't know what to say. When he returned to the villa again, the sky was already bright. He slowly walked upstairs. Chen was still sleeping. She was sleeping on her side and kicked off the blanket with one leg. This was different from before. In the past she was sharp, sensitive, and suspicious. Now she was more stable and resigned to her fate. Lan Yu sat at the head of the bed and gently stroked her delicate face. He said in a low voice, Are you real or fake right now? He didn't know why he kept her by his side, nor did he understand why he insisted on marrying her. Lawyer Su hadn't dealt with the document yet. It was completely possible for him to get it back, but he just didn't want to do that. Because she looked so natural when she slept on his bed and made him yearn for it. He bent down to kiss her, but just as his lips were about to touch hers, she woke up. Chen's eyes quietly fell on his face, and then he tilted his head to look at the sky. Is it dawn? Her voice was a little hoarse, but her tone was soft, just like a wife talking to her husband. Lan Yu's eyes fell on her lips and he looked down. Yes, it's dawn. Chen frowned. But I don't think I ate anything. He said calmly, You fell asleep last night. At this moment, Chen took a sniff and frowned even more. You smoked all night? This time he didn't reply and just looked at her. Chen changed the topic. Will the servants make breakfast or will you make it? He remembered. He stopped her and his eyes were deep. Mrs. Lan, have you ever thought of cooking for me? Chen curled his lips. I'm afraid that you'll get used to it and won't get used to it after the divorce. Lan Yu stared at her fixedly. That's not a good reason, Mrs. Lan. Chen couldn't stand it and said straightforwardly, I'm a model, not a cook. So far only my son can enjoy the food I cook. Besides, Lan Yu, if you need someone to cook you can hire a servant. He stared at her, suddenly stretched out his beautiful fingers and slowly touched her lips. What I want is multifunctional. Chapter 2979. As soon as Qin Chen finished speaking he caught her hand. Lan Yu frowned. Are you not satisfied with me? Any man would be very concerned about whether a woman was satisfied or not, and Lan Yu was no exception. Even if he hated this woman, it would still be a blow to him if she denied his skills in bed. Qin Chen frowned and snorted. Straight man cancer. With that she pushed herself to the bathroom. Even if she didn't want to take a shower she had to go to the toilet. Lan Yu had wanted to chase after her, but when he realized that she wasn't taking a bath he gave up. After all, he wasn't that perverted. He smoked outside and heard the sound of her taking a shower. He didn't go in but went downstairs to make breakfast for her. At her request he made 3 fresh noodles. After making the noodles, Qin Chen still hadn't come down. He had nothing to do so he took out the ingredients from the fridge. All these years, whether it was intentional or not, he would always prepare curry and seafood in the fridge. These were both her favorite foods. Looking at it now he felt that it was a little ironic. Lan Yu thought for a moment, but still threw them into the trash can. Qin Chen saw this scene when she changed her clothes. She stood at the entrance of the dining room and looked at him quietly. You seem very unhappy. No man can be happy after marrying a wife who can't do anything. Lan Yu said and looked up, but then his gaze froze. He looked at Qin Chen who was wearing his black shirt. There was nothing underneath and he was leaning there casually. At that moment his gaze froze and his voice was stern and shocked. Who told you to dress like this? Change it. Qin Chen didn't move. She still leaned there lazily and smiled. You seem very agitated. Lan Yu came over, grabbed her hand and dragged her upstairs. Qin Chen's leg hurt but she didn't make a sound. He threw her onto the bed, grabbed a bathrobe and threw it on her. His tone was very restrained. In the afternoon I'll ask you to prepare clothes for the season for you. In the future don't touch my shirt. Qin Chen slowly sat up and changed in front of him. After changing he was still in a bad mood. He walked to the French window and smoked for a while. Qin Chen walked over, leaned against the wall next to him and looked at him quietly. The person you want to marry, the person you like or the person you hate is not me but the person before you lost your memory, right? Lan Yu's eyes were a little embarrassed. He narrowed his eyes and looked at her. You think too much. I just don't want to live with someone with an endocrine disorder. Lan Yu, if you keep being like this, then I'll make Sister Kwan's schedule be full, and we won't have to see each other more than a few times a year, she said in a serious and calm manner. Lan Yu frowned. Qin Chen smiled. Lan Yu, you really don't have to be serious with me. I can't remember anything. Maybe I've wronged you before but I can't remember it. And I'm not the type to feel guilty about anything you say. So? He looked at her. Qin Chen smiled faintly. So, letting me go is the same as letting yourself go. She shrugged and said carelessly, we cannot get married. If you really have some anger to vent you can look for me at any time. You mean as a sex friend? Lan Yu stared at her. Chapter 2980. Lan Yu's habitual sarcasm started again. Mrs. Lan, tell me, how many sex buddies have you had before me? Qin Chen smiled. If you want you'll be the first. Lan Yu's face looked better. He put away the cigarette butt and began to walk to the door. Let's go down for dinner. Qin Chen did not say anything to provoke him. He followed him downstairs and sat in the dining room. Lan Yu's cooking skills were very good. He had cooked the Sanxian noodles twice so he was very good at it. Qin Chen was a little satisfied with the meal. She suddenly realized that this marriage was not without its benefits. Perhaps after she found a way to get along with Lan Yu she could bring Rong Yu to live with her. With a ready-made chef there was no need to worry about Rong Yu's food. It was unhygienic to eat out all the time and Rong Yu also had a problem with it. However, Qin Chen was not interested in the kitchen at all, so most of the time he could only leave him at his mother's place. Qin Chen was lost in her thoughts. Lan Yu did not expect her to think of this. He whispered, my dad asked me to take you back when I'm free. Qin Chen nodded. Well, if you're free bring Rong Yu with you. Lan Yu frowned and did not say anything. He remembered clearly that she treasured her son and was afraid that he would contaminate it. Now she actually took the initiative to take her son to see his father. He studied her. Chen ate the noodles, wiped his lower lip and said calmly, "You're not abusing a child, are you? Especially not your biological child. The child of your rival." Lan Yu's face did not look very good. "Chen, if you say one more word, believe it or not, I will strangle you to death." Chen put on a fake smile. "If you strangle me to death, who will satisfy you in bed?" Lan Yu was choked. This woman. However, he didn't say anything more. He just threw a card at her before going to the company. "This password is also your birthday. There will be 2 million deposited in it every month. Use it as a house guest. If you want to add anything, buy it yourself." Chen took the card and his gaze fell on his face. "You're so affectionate. I almost thought we'd spend the rest of our lives together." "You wish." He reached out to hold her chin, his expression cold. Chen wasn't afraid of him. He smiled and slapped his hand away. "Don't leave any marks or others will think you're a victim of domestic abuse." Speaking of this, Lan Yu said, "After the Grand Hyatt banquet, I will announce our breakup." That was the beginning of their secret marriage. Chen smiled with some understanding and mockery. "So what you mean is that I can still pick up girls in the future?" She was very bold. "Then can I also make some scandals outside?" Her provocation didn't arouse Lan Yu's anger. He just said lightly, "Do you think that you're still an 18-year-old girl and there are many people fighting for you?" After saying this, he regretted it later. Chen was not an 18-year-old girl, but she was much more popular than a young girl, even if she had a son. Lan Yu left the villa after finishing the task. When he came back in the evening, Chen was not there. He pulled his tie and called her. "Where are you?" It was a little noisy on the other side of Chen. After a while, she seemed to find a place to talk. "I have a charity event. It will last for about 2 days. I will come back the day after tomorrow." It seemed that she noticed his displeasure. She said in a low voice, "Tomorrow is Saturday afternoon. If you want, I can take you to your father's place on Sunday." Chapter 2981. Lan Yu held the phone and said straightforwardly, "Come over tomorrow night. I'll pick up Yu with you the day after tomorrow." Chen was puzzled. He hesitated for a moment and asked, "Why don't I bring Yu with me tomorrow night?" Lan Yu was in a bad mood. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the dark night outside. He rolled up his tie with one hand and said softly, "Because I want to make love to you tomorrow night. Are you satisfied with this answer?" Chen's answer was to hang up the phone directly, so Lan Yu's mood became even worse. He came home late, so the servant didn't cook for him out of habit. He didn't eat outside either. He originally planned to come back and have dinner with Chen. He was very hungry at the moment, but he didn't have the mood to cook alone, especially since he had thrown away most of the ingredients in the fridge. In a bad mood, the man smoked more fiercely. Lan Yu finished 2 cigarettes and coughed a few times. Only then did he remember that he had smoked too much recently. Thinking of what happened to Zhou Chongguang, he felt that he shouldn't smoke anymore. He and Chen didn't sign a prenuptial agreement. If he accidentally died, wouldn't it be exactly what she wanted? Who knows, he might even use his inheritance to find 2 handsome and strong young men. Just thinking about it made Lan Yu's teeth hurt a little. He also felt that he had to take care of himself. He put out the cigarette and walked into the kitchen. He hesitated for a moment, but in the end he made Sanxian noodles. He didn't like the taste of Sanxian noodles in the past, but the spoiled Chen liked it. He felt that whether it was before or after she lost her memory, her appetite was a little abnormal. In the past, who would drink more than 10,000 yuan for a cup of coffee and order takeout chicken steak? Now that she lost her memory, her taste was much lighter. Lan Yu felt a little sad in his heart. He made Sanxian noodles, looked at it for a long time and even took a picture of it. Should he send it to his friends or someone? He knew it very well in his heart. But in the end he didn't send it. What was the point of sending it? Tell Mrs. Lan that he was very obedient at home and had not gone out at all? Lan Yu would never do such a thing. He quickly finished the noodles and went upstairs to take a shower. Before 9 o'clock he was lying on the luxurious bed. This was the first time in 3 years. However, it was inevitable that he would feel a little lonely lying on such a big bed. Lan Yu covered his eyes with his hand and thought of the affair with Chen last night. Unlike last time, she would occasionally take the initiative last night. At least, other than the pain, she was happy and enjoyed it. The reason why she had agreed to his engagement was probably because his skills and physical body made her feel less uncomfortable. At the same time, he also noticed that she had little experience. In fact, compared to before he lost his memory, not only did he not improve, he was even worse. Of course, he didn't like her experience. She was so inexperienced that he almost thought she had never seen anyone else. However, her son Rong-yu was already a grown-up. Lan-yu felt bitter in his heart. Rong-yu was the son of her and Rong-lei. He could only accept it. Thinking like this in a daze, his phone rang in the night and the ringtone was particularly clear. He turned sideways and picked it up. There was a soft voice on the other side. Lan-yu, are you asleep? Chapter 2982. Compared to his sharpness, Qin was very gentle. It's inevitable for men to come into contact with those things at work, and I won't be so nosy. Also, I just want you to do something for me. Lan-yu said, why didn't you say so earlier? Qin was still smiling. You didn't give me a chance. Then she asked him to take the apartment key from the bag she left behind, go to the apartment to find Rong-yu's information, and send it to her parents' house. Lan-yu was a little upset. That's it. Yes, Qin said quietly, and then probably to make him happy she said softly, also you should go to bed early. Lan-yu's answer was to hang up the phone. After hanging up, he felt that he seemed to have overreacted and was a little neurotic. He closed his eyes and tried to fall asleep, but how could he fall asleep after receiving the phone call? The familiar fragrance on the pillow aroused some kind of impulse in him, and he couldn't help hugging the pillow in his arms. For a moment even he felt a little perverted, so he got up and went to the bathroom. In the sound of the water, Mr. Lan sighed. Without a wife by his side, he could only live with his right hand. The next morning he went to the apartment early in the morning and found the things she wanted to send to the Qin family. It was Yi Liangqiu who received him very politely. Qin probably told her about their current relationship. Lan-yu had to go to the company, so he didn't stay for long. When Yi Liangqiu sent him to the car, she said, Qin is my daughter. I don't know what happened between you two, but I know she cares about you. But that was in the past and now she doesn't remember anything. Lan-yu's body stiffened and his fingers held the car door for a long time. He didn't look back and he was frozen like that. At this moment, a small soft thing hugged his leg from behind and said in a childish voice, Uncle. Lan-yu looked down and saw Rong-yu. Rong-yu was wearing one-piece pajamas at home. Obviously he hadn't gotten up yet, but he heard the sound and ran downstairs. Lan-yu looked at it carefully and his heart skipped a beat. The baby in the one-piece pajamas was really cute and adorable. Even if she was born from a love rival, he still couldn't help but feel his heart soften. He picked up the little fellow with one hand and said, You haven't gotten up yet? Xiao Rong-yu wrinkled her little nose and hugged Lan-yu's neck with her little hands. She said with some embarrassment, I can't take off my pants, so I need to pee. He came to find his grandmother, but there was a man here. Xiao Rong-yu was more willing to let a man do this kind of thing for him. His mother said that Ding Ding couldn't be seen by an elderly woman. His grandmother was an elderly woman, so she was also one of the people his mother said. Lan-yu looked at the little guy's clothes. It only took him a few seconds to figure out that it was harder to take off than a woman's clothes. Especially since Qin only wore sweaters and shirts in the past, there was no difficulty at all. As he thought about it, he reached out and carried the little fellow back to the main residence. He personally took off the little fellow's clothes and helped him pee. Xiao Rong-yu sighed in satisfaction as he urinated. Lan-yu was amused. When he was done, he personally put on the clothes. At this moment, Yi Liangqiu suddenly pushed the door open. Xiao Rong-yu screamed, Grandma. Chapter 2983. Yi Liangqiu came in and looked at the little monkey. She smiled helplessly. Mr. Lan Anlin just called me. I have something to deal with. Can you take care of Rong-yu for a day? After all, you and Qin will have to take care of each other in the future. Lan-yu frowned slightly, but he agreed without thinking. He reached out and picked up Rong-yu with one hand. Go get some clothes. I'll take you to breakfast. Yi Liangqiu wanted to say at home, but she thought that she should give them a private space, so she nodded and smiled. Okay. Rong-yu, who was in Lan-yu's arms, pointed upstairs. Over there. Although he was a boy, Lan-yu vaguely saw the shadow of Qin from 3 years ago in him. The very extravagant Qin. Lan-yu walked into Rong-yu's bedroom. At that moment he confirmed that he had met an extravagant person. He touched his forehead, feeling a little funny, but at the same time his eyes were a little wet. He missed it so much. Rong Yu didn't care about his extravagant style. He thought it was reasonable. His small body jumped down and slid into the changing room. "I'll change myself." Lan Yu laughed. Then why did he need his help when he peed just now? He walked to a group of cabinets and picked up an ivory ornament. It was made of ivory. Then he picked up another one. It was a world map made of crystal. He took a step back. How spoiled would a child be when he grew up? It wasn't that he couldn't afford to raise him, but he felt that boys had to be rougher. How could he be raised like a girl? When he grew up, his hobby was to buy new magazines. As he was thinking, Rong Yu had already changed his clothes. He wore a shirt inside and a pair of overalls outside. With his round head he was very cute. The delicate little thing walked in front of Lan Yu, raised her little face and asked softly, "Will you hug me?" Lan Yu was almost discouraged. However, he quickly smiled warmly and said, "Yes." He carried the little fellow with one hand and walked downstairs. Yi Liangqiu was still there. Lan Yu chatted for a while and then carried the little fellow away. After they left, Yi Liangqiu called her husband. "Honey, how was my acting?" Qin Anlin hid in the bedroom and said in a small voice, "Honey, your acting skills are the best. Are you going to play a nurse or a flight attendant tonight?" "The grandmother heavenly empress," he said, "Scram." On the other side, Lan Yu got into the car with the little fellow. Just as he was about to start the car, his secretary called. "President Lan, the meeting will start in half an hour. When will you be coming to the company?" Lan Yu looked at his watch and immediately decided, "Help me buy a children's set meal." The secretary was stunned. "What's wrong with Xiao Lan today? Why does he want to eat the children's meal?" Lan Yu hung up the phone calmly and said to Rong Yu, who was in the back seat, "Let's go to Uncle's office to eat later, okay?" Rong Yu nodded obediently and looked especially cute. Lan Yu felt again that Qin Chen had raised this boy to be especially spoiled. However, he didn't say anything and just focused on driving. When they arrived at the Hyatt headquarters, the black sports car stopped and Lan Yu pulled out the beautiful little boy. The employees of Hyatt exploded. Chapter 2984. The day before yesterday, Xiao Lan and Qin Chen were just messing around, and today he had created such a big thing? And looking at it, it really looked like Xiao Lan. He had confirmed with his eyes that they were biological. Lan Yu didn't think so. He only felt that little Rong Yu and Qin Chen were very similar. Instead, he ignored his own appearance because he had never dared to think like that. He carried the little guy into the elevator with one hand and broke everyone's hearts. This time, Xiao Lan had completely made up his mind. He even recognized someone else's son. Lan Yu couldn't be bothered with those gazes. He stood in the elevator with the little guy in his arms. Little Rong Yu pulled his face. "Uncle, are you unhappy?" No. Lan Yu was expressionless. The little guy sighed. "I know you don't like me. It's better to send me back to Grandma's house." At such a young age, he already knew how to retreat in order to advance. Lan Yu looked at the little guy and frowned. "I don't dislike you." Little Rong Yu stared at him. "But you don't even smile. You don't seem to like me at all." After saying that, he wasn't happy anymore. That little expression was exactly the same as Qin Chen's in the past. Lan Yu really felt that he was quite cheap. There were so many women in this world. Even the previous Lu Wei was cute and obedient. Look at what he had gotten himself into now. The older one was disobedient and ran all over the world. As a married man, he didn't even have a normal sex life. He even had to help her take care of her ex-husband's child. This child was really smart. How could Lan Yu not know? But even if he knew, he couldn't help but be soft-hearted towards this child. Bad, smart and hateful, but damn cute. Lan Yu's expression softened. He squeezed out a strange smile. "Uncle likes you very much." The mischievous little guy immediately covered his body and screamed, "Uncle, don't." The elevator door opened. There was a row of high-level executives standing in front of the elevator, as well as Lan Yu's secretary and assistant. They all stared at their own Xiao in shock. Xiao Lan was carrying an overly beautiful child. At this moment, Xiao Lan's expression was very wretched and the child seemed to be frightened. All these years Xiao Lan had been living like a monk. Was he so desperate that he would even lay his hands on a child? Under those gazes, Xiao Rong became even more energetic. She cried and struggled with all her might. Uncle, Mummy said that I can't let bad uncles touch me. Outside gasps could be heard. Lon really? Lon Yu's face darkened as he looked down at the little person in his arms. Just now he actually thought that he was a little angel. He had forgotten about what happened in Zhao Yan's restaurant last time. Now that he had suffered a loss again, he was sure that this was a little devil in sheep's clothing. He glanced at the people present and said indifferently, "The meeting will be postponed for half an hour." At this time, the secretary trembled as she handed over the children's meal. President Lon, this. It turned out that CO Lon liked to play with raising now. Lon Yu's gaze was stern. As he took it and strode away, he said, "This is Qin Chen's child." What he meant was, don't speak carelessly. If anyone dared to say a word about what happened today, they could forget about retiring in the Grand Hyatt. His words were a blatant threat, but Xiao Rongyu could actually understand it. Being carried on Lon Yu's shoulder, he could even blink at Lon Yu's secretary with his overly beautiful eyes. King Entertainment welcomes you, pretty sister. Chapter 2985. Lon Yu's secretary Enran was melted by the sweet and domineering energy. God, why did God send such an evil and cute baby? He wanted one so badly. Kevin whispered, "Boss and Miss Qin are secretly married." "It's a secret." Enran blinked. "Really?" Kevin hummed in agreement. "That's fast enough." Enran smiled and whispered after a while, "I knew that President Lon and Lu Wei wouldn't have a chance. If there was a chance, they would have lived together a long time ago." President Lon was a man in his early 30s. Which man in his early 30s didn't have any needs? If a man didn't touch you, it wasn't because he respected you, but because he didn't want you at all. Lu Wei was too blind. See, the main character came back and got married immediately. That was a sign of love. Even if they said they hated each other, it was still pretentious. When men were pretentious, they were more hypocritical than women. While the secretary and the assistant were busy planning, Lon Yu had already brought the little guy into the office. The hateful little guy was thrown on the sofa. Lon Yu pulled his tie and looked at him condescendingly. Act again." Little Rong Yu's little body shrank and he looked at him eagerly. "Will you hit me?" "Yes." Lon Yu snorted and then looked at the little guy. "Are you afraid?" The little guy's little face showed the contempt of a king. "If you hit me, I'll tell Mom not to sleep with you." Lon Yu was furious. He bowed slightly. "Who told you that?" As soon as little Rong Yu said it, he betrayed Qin Anlin. "Grandpa and Grandma said it." Lon Yu snorted. "What a bad family." He sat on the sofa, picked up the little guy and put him on his lap. He wasn't in a hurry to hit the little guy's butt. Instead, he gently touched it. "Now do you know you were wrong?" Little Rong Yu burst into tears. "I know I was wrong. Uncle, please don't sleep with my mommy. Mommy is mine." He cried loudly and struggled with his little hands and feet. His pitiful look made Lon Yu feel like he was harming the seedlings of the country. His heart softened and he wanted to carry the little fellow to comfort her, but as soon as he did so, he realized, it's fake. Not a single tear. It was all an act. Lon Yu sneered. It was a pity that he wasn't a child star. Xiao Rong seemed to be able to see through his thoughts as he cried out, "I have such a distinguished status, how could I possibly go and act?" Lon Yu no longer paid attention to this troublemaker. He directly put him down and slapped him on the buttocks, again and again without any mercy. This time the little thing was really crying. It was sobbing. Where was the slightest bit of dignity? Lon Yu hit him solidly. His palms hurt a little, so he stopped. Xiao Rongyu lay on his lap and kept twitching. He was still stubbornly holding on. "I'm telling you, I won't forgive you. If that's the case, should I hit you harder?" Lon Yu looked at the sweat on the little guy's head. His voice became softer and a touch of tenderness slid through his heart. His hand gently touched him. "Does it hurt a lot?" "Come and try," the delicate little guy whispered, but he didn't dare to provoke Lon Yu again. He only dared to complain softly. Lon Yu laughed. "If you're not naughty, of course I won't hit you." The little thing moved his body, looked up and said pitifully, "I can't guarantee it." "Then I can't guarantee it either." Lon Yu looked at the little face that was too beautiful and his heart completely softened. Momo, touch him. He felt that a boy could be so unbelievably soft. If he hadn't seen him pee, he would have suspected that Qin Chen was a pervert who raised his daughter like a son. Chapter 2986. Lan Yu looked at the beautiful little face and couldn't help but overlap with the Qinchin in his memory. The love for Qinchin was buried in his hatred, so there was no way to express it. Instead, he had some kind of love for this little face that could be expressed. Lan Yu reached out and hugged the little hand. Before he came back to his senses, he kissed the little man's face and said in a hoarse voice, "Uncle apologizes to you." Xiao Rongyue looked at him and rolled his eyes. He suddenly swallowed the evil thoughts in his stomach. This uncle seemed to like him very much. The little man was still tearful. "I'm telling you, don't be too obsessed with me. Also, don't touch my P***. I'm going to be a lawyer in the future. Be careful or I'll sue you." Lan Yu smiled slightly, reached out his hand and gently stroked his little head. "Then can I hug you?" Xiao Rongyue said proudly, "You can be obsessed with me, but you can't go too far because I'm going to marry a woman when I grow up." The little boy had long forgotten about being beaten. He looked at Lan Yu and said, "But you can be obsessed with my mother. She's also very beautiful, isn't she? Her waist is slender and it feels good." The little man was talking nonsense, but the man who had held him felt his heart skip a beat. There was an indescribable longing in his heart. In the end, he stared at Xiao Rongyue and asked in a low voice, "Do you know where your mother went?" Xiao Rongyue thought about it seriously for a while. Lan Yu's expression was rather nervous as he kept looking at his little face. In the end, the little boy coughed softly and said, "I promised my mother to keep it a secret." Lan Yu narrowed his eyes and looked at the children's food on the side. He asked the little boy very softly, "Are you hungry?" It would have been better if he hadn't said it. Once he said it, Xiao Rongyue was really hungry. He looked at him with his most adorable expression with tears. Lan Yu was not moved. "You can have breakfast if you tell me. You're a child abuser." Xiao Rongyue was not someone to be trifled with. He climbed down from his father's arms and said angrily, "If I lose a piece of meat, you will lose a tail of penis." Lan Yu's Adam's apple kept moving, his voice gloomy. "Who taught you that?" She looked as if she was going to beat the little guy up. Rongyu burst into tears. "You only know how to bully me." Lan Yu did not soften and glared at him. The little fellow crawled to the other end of the sofa. She stopped crying and sulked. From Lan Yu's angle, her skin was sparkling and translucent, insanely beautiful. Tenderness welled up in his heart, but he didn't want this little rascal to notice it, so he kept looking at her. After a long time, the child couldn't help but run over and climb into Lan Yu's arms. "I'm hungry." Her eyes were filled with tears and she looked very pitiful. Lan Yu stared at him. "Are you going to be naughty again?" "No." Xiao Rongyue was obedient. As for Lan Yu, he knew that the little guy was coaxing him, but his heart was still touched. He took the children's meal and fed him personally. Her little face was white and her little mouth was red and moist. She was indescribably beautiful. Lan Yu's gaze unconsciously softened. When his secretary came in safely, she saw such a warm scene. That child was really beautiful. However, after being stunned, and Ran thought to herself, "This child looks a lot like Mr. Lan. If I didn't know that he was the child of Qin Chen and Rong Lei, I would have thought that he was Mr. Lan's son." Chapter 2987. Lan Yu's gaze became gentler. "Just wait for a while. Oh right, accompany Rong Yu later." When he said it, it was extremely natural, as if Rong Yu was his son. And Ran's heart skipped a beat and she unconsciously smiled. "Okay, Xiao Lan." Lan Yu looked at her and didn't say anything else. After feeding little Rong Yu, he wiped his mouth for him. "I'm going to a meeting later. Be good and don't run around, okay?" "I want to read." Little Rong Yu pointed at the huge bookcase. Lan Yu laughed. "There might not be any books you want to read here. Secretarian, get someone to buy a cabinet of books." He seemed to think for a moment. "Arrange a cabinet and put it out. In the future, Rong Yu can directly read it when he comes over." Secretarian blinked. How doting. If Xiao Lan treated Qin Chen like this, he would have taken him down long ago. However, as a secretary, she didn't dare to interfere with her boss's private affairs. 10 minutes later, all kinds of children's books were brought over. And Ran personally arranged a bookcase and placed them properly. She even thoughtfully brought some snacks and took a pen and phone to deal with things. Lan Yu stretched out his hand to touch the little guy. "I'll take you to lunch at noon." The little guy, who was well served, didn't even raise his head. Lan Yu was quite embarrassed, while Secretary and smiled at her boss. "Go on, don't worry." I will definitely take good care of young Master Rong. Young Master Rong. Lan Yu's eyes darkened. When he walked out, his fingers clenched into a fist. He had thought that if he and Qinshan got married, it might not be good for Rong Yu to have the surname Rong. At this moment he actually forgot about the agreement with her. He just wanted to go on with her. After Lan Yu finished the meeting, when he returned to the office, little Lan Yu actually fell asleep. He slept straight like a little pig with a small blanket covering his body. It was Peppa Pig's. He didn't know where Secretary Ann got it from. Secretary Ann smiled as she saw him enter. He fell asleep in just a while. He even wanted to drink milk before he slept. After she said that, she felt that it was inappropriate. However, Lan Yu didn't seem to be angry. He just walked to the sofa and sat down. His big palm gently touched little Rong Yu's little face. He lowered his head and smelled it. There was even a milky fragrance. Lan Yu looked up at Secretary and said somewhat embarrassedly, "He was making a big fuss, so I went to buy some milk for him to drink." Lan Yu nodded and looked to the side unexpectedly. "That is a very beautiful milk bottle. Pink with a piggy's milk bottle." Secretary Ann's voice trembled even more. It was little Rong Yu's request. She thought that Xiao Lan would be angry, but Xiao Lan only said faintly, "Got it. You can leave now." After Secretary Ann left, Lan Yu's gaze landed on the face of the little person. At this moment his own expression was somewhat repressed. He felt that he was almost a pervert. He had actually overlapped the little man in front of him with Qinshan, and had transferred his love and hate for Qinshan to the beautiful little boy in front of him. He wanted to hug him, he wanted to kiss him. But that was Rong Yu's son. He must be crazy to do this. Lan Yu walked to the bathroom and splashed his face with cold water. When he raised his face, he looked at himself in the mirror. He felt that he had lost control. He clearly hated Qinshan. It was clearly a temporary marriage, but he took it seriously. At this moment the phone in his pocket rang. He took it out and saw that it was a call from Lin Cici's nursing home. Chapter 2988. Lan Yu looked at the mirror and asked in a low voice, "What is it?" It was the director who called personally. His voice was trembling. "Xiao Lan, something happened to Cici." "What happened?" Lan Yu looked at himself in the mirror and tugged at his tie. The director said quickly, "Isn't there a charity group coming to our place?" After Cici ran over to take a look, she started throwing a tantrum. Now she's curled up into a ball. Also, she locked a famous model in her small room and didn't allow anyone to enter. We don't know what's going on inside, and Cici refuses to come out. No matter how we call her, she won't come out. We are afraid that something will happen, so we have to trouble Xiao Lan. Lan Yu's eyes narrowed. "I'll be right there." As he said that, he walked out. His gaze fell on little Rong Yu. After a moment of hesitation, he called Secretary and take care of Rong Yu. "I have something to do." Secretary Ann quickly came in. She was a little puzzled but didn't dare to ask. Before Lan Yu left, he looked at Rong Yu's little face again. He lowered his head and couldn't help but kiss the little guy. He was reluctant to let him go. "If I can't come back before work, get Kevin to send him to my father's house," he arranged in a low voice. Secretary Ann nodded. Then Lan Yu drove to Lin Cici Sanatorium. The car arrived an hour later. The car stopped and he walked in. He saw that there were many reporters in the sanatorium, as well as some people from the fashion industry. Lan Yu's heart sank. He thought of what Qinshan had said to him. She said she had a charity event. Did that mean that he was going to do charity here alone? The director was beside him. Lan Yu's expression was ugly. "I remember that I will allocate 10 million to this sanatorium every year. Why do you still need this?" The director's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He apologized. "It was our negligence. We wanted to raise our profile." Lan Yu looked at him indifferently. "No matter what happens today, you can't be the director anymore." As he said that, he walked up the stairs. Lin Cici's room was in the middle of the second floor. He walked over to the door and knocked. The nurse who usually took care of Cici was about to speak when Lan Yu glanced at her. "Don't make a sound." The young nurse pursed her lips and did not dare to make another sound. Lan Yu waited quietly. There was no movement inside. He cleared his throat and spoke in a low voice. "Cici, I'm coming in." As he spoke, he gently opened the door. A scream came from inside. Stunned, he immediately pushed the door open and saw that Cici's forehead was bleeding. And the person she was entangled with was none other than Qin Chen, whom he had expected. Lan Yu was stunned. Then he leaned back and Lin Cece fell into his arms. Lan Yu held her and didn't care about Qin Chen. He carefully held Lin Cece's head to check the wound. How did you hit it? Lin Cece bit her lip and said in a low voice, she hit it. Lan Yu looked up at Qin Chen and frowned. You hit it? Qin Chen's lips curled into a cold smile. Yes. You feel sorry for her? She didn't want to deny it. She didn't want to tell him that the little idiot in his arms suddenly hit her head when she heard his voice, and then framed her. Chapter 2989. President Lan, do you have tender feelings for women? Qin Chen sneered and said, I can't tell that President Lan is such a man. But if that's the case you can divorce me and marry this idiot. Lan Yu said, shut up. He couldn't stand her calling him an idiot. Qin Chen chuckled and said, isn't that so? Oh, I was wrong. She's not an idiot. You are. Lan Yu slapped her in the face. That crisp sound rang out and Qin Chen was a little stunned. He had come in and accused her indiscriminately. He had hugged that idiot so gently that he hadn't seen how many injuries she had suffered. It wasn't that Qin Chen couldn't beat Lin Cece, nor was it that she couldn't bear to hurt her, but she still needed to maintain her public image. She looked at Lan Yu and sneered. Just because she didn't care about the idiot didn't mean that she wouldn't care about him. So she raised her hand and slapped him. There were 5 finger marks on Lan Yu's face. He glared at her. At this moment he also noticed that Qin Chen was in a mess. There were a few bloodstains on her face, which seemed to have been caused by nails, and her hair was messy. He looked at her and said, are you hurt? Yes, your sweetheart scratched me, Qin Chen said coldly and walked straight to the door. At this moment he found that she had lost one of her high heels and one of her feet was stained with blood. She was obviously hurt. He stopped her and said, wait a minute. Let's go back together later. Qin Chen's body froze and he said, President Lan slapped me. The jujube he gave me wasn't sweet at all. At this moment Lin Cece tugged at Lan Yu's sleeve and said, I want a kiss. It hurts. Lan Yu frowned and said hoarsely, Cece? Lin Cece's mouth was trembling and she looked hurt. Lan Yu's heart softened. In his heart Cece was just a child, so he naturally kissed her forehead. But he didn't know how sarcastic this was in Qin Chen's eyes. Qin Chen watched quietly and suddenly said, Lan Yu, are you mistaken? All these years the one you've been thinking about isn't me but this little idiot. If you want a divorce in the future I will gladly grant your wish. Lan Yu's face darkened. Lin Cece hugged his waist, buried her face in his arms and began to cry. Are you married? Didn't you say that you've been thinking about someone? Lan Yu felt extremely helpless. Only then did he know why Cece was like this. She probably saw the scandal between him and Qin Chen on TV, and Qin Chen happened to come over, so she deliberately acted in front of Qin Chen. He couldn't bear to blame her, nor could he explain to Qin Chen. He could only watch as Qin Chen walked out. After he left, he touched Lin Cece's head and said helplessly, Cece, I found the person I like, but she doesn't remember me. Lin Cece's eyes widened. After a while she said with a strange expression, Is it her? Lan Yu nodded. Then go after her. Lin Cece looked guilty and then wrung her hands. I'm sorry. She wanted to help him get rid of the seductress, but she didn't expect it to be the person he liked. The person Lan Yu liked was so beautiful and she especially liked her long hair and height. Chapter 2990. Lin Cece bit her lips and apologized in a small voice. She wanted to apologize but Lan Yu refused. Lan Yu treated the wound on her forehead and comforted her for a long time before walking out. The people from before were all gone. Of course Qin Chen was gone too. Lan Yu stood on the lawn outside and called her. The phone rang a few times before it was picked up. But it wasn't Qin Chen who picked it up. It was a staff member beside him. Probably because she knew Lan Yu's identity, the staff member's voice was especially soft. Mr. Lan, Miss Qin is treating her wound. Where is she? Lan Yu sounded unhappy. The staff member looked at Qin Chen. Miss Qin, Mr. Lan is asking where you are. What should I say? Qin Chen was being bandaged. She glanced over and said calmly, just say that I have an appointment to attend. The staff member nodded and let go of the phone. Mr. Lan, Miss Qin has an event to attend. Lan Yu sneered. Give her the phone and let her talk to me. The staff member was quite indignant. Why? Miss Chin was an international supermodel and her family background was not bad. She also owned 10% of King Entertainment's shares. Such a woman didn't need to please any man. Hence the staff member's tone was also quite harsh. Miss Chin doesn't have time. Lan Yu's voice became even colder. I am her husband. Ask her if she has time to come home and have sex tonight. His voice was so loud that everyone in the nanny van heard it and felt extremely uncomfortable. The air was filled with subtle. Chin already had a headache, her body hurt and her feet hurt. At this moment that blind and hateful man dared to say that. She took the phone angrily and her voice was even colder. Lan Yu, what do you want to do? Why are you calling me instead of comforting your little sweetheart? He was angry. Although she didn't want to admit it, she couldn't deny it. Lan Yu's voice was stuck. After a moment he said in a low voice, Are you angry? I wouldn't dare. Chin sneered, I just find it strange. Even if CEO Lan wants to find a female confidant, he should find a pretty one. Or is it that your taste is so heavy? Lan Yu did not explain and only told her, Rong Yu is in my office, but if I come back late, Kevin will send him to my father's place. Are you coming back tonight? Chin was speechless for a moment. Rong Yu was with him? No matter how dissatisfied she was, she could only endure it and said softly, I'll be back at around 8 o'clock tonight. Don't send Rong Yu there. With that she coldly hung up the phone. The staff around her looked at her. Miss Chin and President Lan had a secret marriage, right? Also, it seemed like they didn't have a good relationship. There were a few finger marks on Miss Chin's face. They didn't look like they were hit by that idiot Lin Cece. That they looked like President Lan. No one dared to speak and Chin was not in the mood either. In fact, she didn't have a job because she didn't want to face Lan Yu at this time. Therefore, when she arrived in the city, she asked someone to book a presidential suite at the GM hotel. After entering, she asked her assistant to contact the SP and did a facial. Only then did her face disappear a little. However, if one looked closely, they could still see that there were traces of blood. She slept in the hotel for a few hours. During these hours, Lan Yu knew where she was, but he was not in a hurry. He cooked a sumptuous dinner in his villa. Chapter 2991. Kevin called to ask what he should do with Rong Yu. Lan Yu thought for a moment. Send him to my father's place. Drive carefully. Kevin was surprised, but he didn't say anything. Something had happened to Chin at the charity event at the sanatorium today. There were reporters there, but they were suppressed by Mr. Lan. The matter had been settled long ago, but Mr. Lan wanted to send Rong Yu to the old CEO's place. He probably wanted to be alone with Chin. Lan Yu hung up the phone and looked at his watch. It was already 7 o'clock. Outside the window it was already dusk and it looked a little hazy. Lan Yu walked to the window and quietly smoked a cigarette before dialing Chin's number. Her phone rang for a long time but no one answered. He was a little anxious. He kept calling until the third time before she answered. Her voice was a little soft as if she had just woken up. Where are you? His voice was hoarse and there was an inexplicable emotion in it. It seemed that after she stayed here for a night, the house would feel empty without her. On the other side, Chin sat up with the phone in her hand and scratched her hair. At the hotel. The word hotel touched Lan Yu's nerves. His face was very cold. Chin, you are a married woman. Now you are telling me that you are fooling around in a hotel. Chin rolled her eyes, feeling that it was difficult to communicate with such a man. However, she was in a bad mood today. Her tone was impolite and full of the smell of gunpowder. Compared to Mr. Lan, who likes to fool around in the sanatorium, isn't it normal for me to fool around in a hotel? She said coldly and mockingly. Or has Mr. Lan become an idiot and unreasonable because he has been with a little idiot for too long? Lan Yu was furious. He held the phone in silence for a while. GM Hotel, right? I'll pick you up. She was stunned for a moment before realizing that he had always known where she was. She was afraid that he would really find her, so she didn't provoke him anymore and said in a low voice, I'll drive back myself. Lan Yu paused. Your foot is injured. Not as delicate as your sweetheart, little idiot. Chin mocked. For some reason Lan Yu could hear a hint of jealousy in her tone. He didn't explain and only said faintly, I'll wait for you. Chin chose to hang up the phone before him. As he got up, he threw the phone on the bed. She went to the bathroom to take a shower and tidied herself up. Without putting on any makeup, she put on a pair of sunglasses and went out. She was very tall and her brown hair was a little wild. She stood out in the crowd. When passing through the lobby, many people recognized Chen. Fortunately, this was a high-class hotel, so there were no crazy fans. But Chen's photo was still taken, and the next day it made the headlines. The headline was, "The Secret Meeting of Supermodels and Wealthy Businessmen, The Great Battle of One Day Why." At this time, Chen sat in the car, fastened his seatbelt and looked at his phone. It was already 7:30. It took about the same amount of time to get to Lan Yu's villa. Chen started the car and the white Lamborghini sped up instantly. It was convertible again and his brown hair danced in the night sky. At 8 o'clock sharp, she arrived at his villa on time. She unfastened her seatbelt and got out of the car while watching the movements in the villa. Chapter 2992. Chen puts down her bag and sits opposite him. "Where's Rong Yu?" Lan Yu looks up at her eyes and says lightly, "He's at my dad's place." Chen is a little annoyed. "Lan Yu, you're too much." "Too much?" Lan Yu walks into the dining room first. After waiting for Chen to come in, he pours himself a glass of red wine and continues, "Compared with you fooling around in the hotel, I'll make good arrangements for Rong Yu. He's the best husband and father." Chen glares at him. She has the intention to have a cold war with him, because maybe he won't ask her to fulfill her obligations as a couple. But all her perseverance disintegrates after seeing the dishes on the table. She's very hungry. So she doesn't argue with him anymore. She takes the bowl and chopsticks and eats without needing him to tell her. Lan Yu doesn't have a good appetite like her. He smokes a cigarette and says lightly, "Do you think I'm a servant?" After Chen finished eating, he wiped his lips and said, "You cooked so much food, didn't you say it was for me?" "Oh, I remember, there's a little idiot waiting for you to feed in the sanatorium. Lan Yu, I'm really sorry. If I had known that it was your little idiot, I wouldn't have disturbed her and accidentally hurt her." Lan Yu's eyes are gentle. He knows everything, but Chen doesn't want to explain. She would rather he misunderstand. Moreover, she kept calling him a little idiot just to make him angry. He just smiles gently. "Now that you know, don't provoke her in the future." Chen ignores him and continues to eat. But it seems that when she eats, it doesn't taste as good as before. After all, her mood is not the same. Lan Yu finishes the red wine and starts to eat. When she finishes eating and wants to leave, he says lightly, "Sit down, I have something to tell you." Chen flipped his hair and leaned against the back of the chair, playing with his fingernails. He didn't look very focused. In Lan Yu's eyes, she looked like she was doing official business. She didn't look like a wife, but more like she was taking photos. He was very dissatisfied, so he naturally did not have the mood to eat. He only drank a few mouthfuls before putting it down. The family servant came to tidy up and asked in a low voice, "Sir, are you not going to eat?" It took 2 hours to make and it was so sumptuous that it would be a pity not to eat it. Lan Yu's gaze fell on Chen's face. He said indifferently, "I'm not eating anymore. Pour it out." He got up and glanced at Chen. "Let's talk in my study." Chen didn't move from his seat. He didn't care about the presence of the servants and said lazily, "Let's go to the bedroom." "Lan Yu, don't you just want to make love to me? Aren't you tired of making things so complicated?" His face is livid and the servants at the side don't dare to say anything. In the end, he snorted and went upstairs. He didn't say where he was going, but Chen felt that it was the bedroom. His face of abstinence might be able to deceive others, but to her, it was just a look of lust. And she was afraid that he would mess around in the study. If she couldn't choose to have sex, she would choose to do it on a comfortable and soft bed. At least it wouldn't hurt that much. Chen followed him into the bedroom and closed the door. She didn't argue and just lay on the bed, kicking off her high heels. "Tell me, what's the matter?" Chapter 2993. He looked at her and said softly, "Come home with me tomorrow. We're going to pick up Rong Yu." Chen nodded absent-mindedly. "Okay." Lan Yu stared at her and his throat was blocked. They used to have such a beautiful past. That past was casual and full of flesh. He didn't need any reason to want her. But now he had to spend a long time to sleep with her and make love to her. He even cooked a table full of dishes. He didn't know if he was trying to please her, and he didn't know if it was because of the remaining love or because of today's guilt. He wanted her, but he didn't know what to do. He couldn't release the turbulence in his heart, and finally he leaned forward and kissed her lips. He felt her resistance, but he pinned her hands firmly on both sides of her body. He said in a low voice, "Don't move or I'll hurt you." After a few years of being alone, this body wouldn't be satisfied because of a few affairs. It would only become more and more greedy. Even though he warned her like this, Chen still struggled and twisted her body, trying to escape. Lan Yu held her and didn't let her move. He pressed her and kissed her deeply. She thought that she would make love to him calmly, but when his lips touched her, she thought of the way he kissed Lin Cece in front of her in the sanatorium. He was handsome and gentle. Did he do shameless things behind her back? Did he also hug Lin Cece and make love? Chen turned her face to the side and panted softly. "I'm not in the mood." Lan Yu paused and looked at her deeply. "Are you still bothered by what happened today?" "No." Chen smiled and turned her face back. She caressed his handsome face with her slender fingers and said gently, "Anyway, our marriage is only temporary. As long as you don't play a dishonorable role in Rongyu's life, I won't make things difficult for your little idiot. After we get divorced, it's not impossible for you to marry her, but," she pulled down his head and whispered in his ear, "it's probably impossible for you to have 2 wives. If you touch another woman during our marriage, then get out of my bed." "Is this an agreement or a threat?" Lan Yu propped himself up and his voice was extremely hoarse. "And Mrs. Lan, you're still jealous." Without batting an eyelid, she spat out a few words. "I just think it's dirty." Lan Yu was infuriated. Did she think he was dirty? She was really thick-skinned enough to say that. He had been chaste for the past 3 years, but she was married to someone else and had such a big son. He didn't even despise her, but she still had the nerve to say that. He moved slowly away, stared at her for a moment and then went out. The door was slammed loudly. Chen heaved a sigh of relief and her body softened. After a while she looked at the door again. After making sure that the angry man wouldn't come back, she closed her eyes in relief. She ate a little too much and she was a little sleepy. Models should be on a diet, but she still acted presumptuously today. She was still in a daze and the man in the study room was still sulking. He smoked one cigarette after another, angry at her and angry at himself. She was his wife. Why couldn't he make love to her? Why couldn't he make love to her? He also wanted to make her cry and watch her cry and beg him. Just thinking about it made his heart flutter. Chapter 2994. Lan Yu thought that he had come back to make love to his wife, and he had thought of many ways to force her. However, he didn't expect that when he returned to the master bedroom, Chen was still awake. She was applying medicine to her feet and her face. Her whole body was immersed in the medicine, so the master bedroom was naturally filled with the smell of medicine. No matter how strong a man's interest was, it would be dispelled. He pursed his thin lips and finally walked in. Chen heard the sound and looked up. She looked at him for a while and then began to apply medicine to her feet clumsily. As Lan Yu watched, he suddenly found it hard to bear. She used to be a top surgeon, but now she couldn't even deal with her own external injuries. He sat next to her and pulled her feet over. "Let me do it." Although his voice was very soft, Chen could sense the displeasure in it. She put her feet on his knees and looked up at him. "You don't seem happy. Are you still feeling sorry for your little idiot?" Lan Yu glanced at her, grunted and began to apply the medicine for her. His technique wasn't good, but it wasn't bad either. At least it was much better than hers. However, when he accidentally touched her wound, she frowned and snorted softly. Lan Yu looked at her and didn't say anything. He took the gauze and wrapped it for her. Chen refused. "I don't cover this." He didn't stop, but his voice was several degrees colder. "Miss Chen, do you think you're walking on a runway now? You're at home now." Chen looked at him and didn't look away. After a long time she snorted and said, "I remember that I'm Mrs. Lan now." As soon as she finished speaking, her chin was held by Lan Yu. He stared at her and said in a tense voice, "In your heart, are you Mrs. Lan or Mrs. Rong?" His eyes forced her, leaving no room for her to escape. Chen couldn't avoid it. She stared at him for a long time before she chuckled. "In my heart, I'm not anyone's wife. I'm Chen." As she spoke, there was a smile on her face, but there was no smile in her eyes. In Lan Yu's eyes there was a lack of affection. That's right, fickle. She was heartless to everyone, not only to him but also to Rong Lei. He tightened his grip on her chin and narrowed his eyes. He said word by word, I really want to kill you. Sorry. Qin Chen smiled faintly. I've made you feel bad, but I have a good suggestion. Divorce me and marry your little idiot. I think you'll be in a much better mood. Lan Yu smiled. After letting go of her, he tidied up the rest of the medicine and said calmly, Mrs. Qin, I'm afraid I have to disappoint you. I spent so much effort to deal with the Rong family. Why do you think I did it? Qin Chen looked down. That's because you're bored. Really? She kicked him lightly with her uninjured foot and leaned back against the headboard. Didn't you spend so much effort just to have sex with me? Seeing that he wanted to refute, Qin Chen smiled mockingly. Do you really have a deep hatred for me? Then kill me. Why did you treat my wound? Why did you please me and cook for me? As his face became more and more gloomy, Qin Chen concluded with a sneer, so men are cheap. Chapter 2995. His face darkened and he walked out abruptly. He came in and made love 7 times a night, but it was all in vain. He left in anger and Qin Chen lay down peacefully. She was really too tired and her feet were also very painful. She felt even more uncomfortable. Although she didn't care about her husband, it didn't mean that she would be indifferent if he kissed someone else in front of her and was a little idiot. She angrily removed the pills from her face, then picked them up and stuck them on her face. She felt that it was a little ugly and would lower Lan Yu's reputation for being shameless. Just like that, she fell asleep. Lan Yu was extremely annoyed. He walked to the sofa on the first floor and smoked a few cigarettes. He raised his hand to look at his watch and couldn't take it anymore. He called Papa Lan. He couldn't fall asleep, and obviously Papa Lan couldn't fall asleep either. The old and the young were speechless. After a long time, Papa Lan said slowly, Xiao Rongyu is quite cute, but if Lan Yu had taken care of Qin Chen at that time, then Xiao Rongyu would have been his eldest grandson. Every time he thought of this, Papa Lan was exasperated and felt that Lan Yu was useless. After sleeping for so long, he didn't even sow a little seed and let someone else beat him to it. Why did the Lan family produce such a useless thing? However, Papa Lan wouldn't tell this to Lan Yu. He only said some encouraging words. It's okay. You and Qin Chen can have a few more. A few more? Lan Yu couldn't help laughing. Qin Chen clearly didn't want him to touch her. How many more did he want to have with her? I don't have that kind of thought, he said to his father calmly, and then asked about Xiao Rongyu's situation. After making sure that the little guy was asleep, he said, I'll come over with Qin Chen for dinner tomorrow. Papa Lan sighed and didn't say anything else. Lan Yu hung up and returned to the master bedroom. Qin Chen was asleep and the bedroom was dark and gloomy. He lay down beside her and no longer had that intention. Closing his eyes, he could smell the shower gel on her body. The smell was the same as his because she didn't buy anything when she moved in. The scent belonged to him and she belonged to him. Compared to many years ago, he had the upper hand, but Lan Yu leaned over and gently hugged her. He buried his face in her neck and murmured, Qinjin, why do I feel like you're still so high up and out of my reach? She could not answer him. She was trapped in the nightmare. Lan Yu's face was pressed against hers and he only noticed it. He was startled and then he gently patted her face. But she could not wake up. She cried softly, as weak as a little girl. She began to murmur in a low voice, Rong Lei. Lan Yu's body froze. She was calling Rong Lei. She had forgotten about herself, but she still remembered Rong Lei. Lan Yu smiled softly. She was his wife now, but her heart still belonged to Rong Lei. Lan Yu let go of her and let her sink into the nightmare. In the darkness, his eyes were filled with pain. She was not the only one in pain. She lost Rong Lei and he lost her heart. He thought, I don't know who is more pitiful than the other. She didn't sleep that night. At dawn, Qin Chen woke up. When she opened her eyes, she saw Lan Yu's enlarged face. She was stunned and remembered what happened yesterday. She wanted to get up, but her head was still a little heavy. Halfway up, she fell back down. At this moment, she heard a mocking voice, Mrs. Lan. Chapter 2996. Qin Chen looked up at the ceiling and said faintly, I had a dream. She covered her head and cold sweat broke out on her forehead. It was a very realistic dream. Lan Yu's gaze was slightly cold. You don't need to tell me about your dream. After saying that, he lifted the quilt and walked into the bathroom, slamming the door loudly. Qin Chen, on the other hand, was still lying there holding his head. It was very painful, as if something was about to break out of the cocoon. Her head was splitting. Every time she tried to recall the lost memories, her head would hurt very much. So she didn't think about it later, but the dream last night was so realistic that it affected a part of her memory. It seemed that other than Rong Lei, she also remembered something else. Those fragments, that person, the man lying motionless on the bed. Who was that man? But in the dream she wanted to approach, but it was as if she was frozen, and she could never get close. Qin Chen's body was covered in hot sweat. She closed her eyes and curled up her body. This was the reason why she gave up looking for the past, because it was too painful. When Lan Yu came out, Qin Chen had already returned to normal. She said lightly, "There are no clothes for me here, and I don't want to go out wearing your clothes." Lan Yu stood there looking at her for a while, feeling refreshed, and said lightly, "I'll get someone to send it over later." After a pause he said, "What brand do you like to wear?" Qin Chen mentioned a few brands and Lan Yu called and ran to get it done. While he was on the phone, Qin Chen went to take a shower. When she came out, Lan Yu had prepared breakfast. Like before, he didn't take care of her because of her harsh words last night, but Qin Chen could feel his coldness. But she didn't care. It was better for him to be cold and indifferent. They ate breakfast in silence, and the managers of several brands came one after another, bringing over the season's new products. There were rows of them, not to mention one season, even 3 years. Qin Chen frowned and looked at Lan Yu. "This is too extravagant." Lan Yu replied naturally, "You used to be much more extravagant than this." Although the brands she signed up for were all top international brands, they weren't considered extravagant. Qin Chen covered his face. "Did I?" Lan Yu looked at her and didn't say anything else. After Qin Chen finished eating, she went upstairs to change her clothes. She wore a simple gray t-shirt and a chiffon long skirt. Her long legs were faintly discernible, which was very attractive. Lan Yu glanced at it and frowned. "Change it." Qin Chen glanced at him. "That's not a big deal." Lan Yu pursed his thin lips and said nothing more. He went outside and got into the car. Qin Chen took his bag and sat in the passenger seat. Lan Yu reached out to wipe the rearview mirror and started the car. When the car drove out of the villa area, the two of them were still silent. Qin Chen still said, "Lan Yu, are you going to keep giving me a cold war? I remember that we are going to see father. He's not important." Lan Yu's voice was slightly cold, and he had no intention of paying attention to her. Qin Chen had felt his fiery heat before, and now that she was so cold, she didn't feel disappointed. He just felt that he was smart. She did not speak again and sat quietly. About half an hour later, the car drove into a quiet residential area where Father Lan lived. Chapter 2997. The black sports car stopped slowly. As soon as Qin Chen opened the door, a little thing flew into her arms. "Mommy." Qin Chen smiled and hugged Xiao Rongyu in his arms and kissed him. "Baby, did you make a fuss last night?" Rongyu looked a little guilty, but he didn't say anything. On the other hand, Mr. Lan smiled and smoothed things over. Fortunately, the little guy wasn't naughty. Although he wasn't his own grandson, Rongyu looked good and smart, so Mr. Lan still liked him very much. Most importantly, he felt that although his son Lan Yu said that it was only a temporary marriage, why did he feel that his son was disappointing and wanted to rely on Qin Chen for the rest of his life? In fact, he quite sympathized with Qin Chen. From the beginning to the end, it seemed that his son was pestering other girls, from men to women, and he didn't let go of anything. It was not good for Mr. Lan to intervene in the affairs of the younger generation, so he was only responsible for Rongyu. Qin Chen's son was taken away by Mr. Lan in an instant, saying that he wanted to go to the small park and show off to his old buddies. His proud expression was like a child who got a new toy that others didn't have and couldn't wait to go out and show it off. Qin Chen just smiled and didn't say anything. When Mr. Lan left, he coughed again. "We haven't had lunch yet. Today is Sunday and the servants are on holiday. Lan Yu, take Qin Chen to the supermarket to buy some things to cook. Remember to cook by yourself and Qin Chen can just watch. The little girl's hands are very delicate, so don't bully her." After saying that, Mr. Lan took his little cutie for a walk. The feeling of having a grandson was really good. He really wanted to have someone else's child, but he had to work hard for his own son. He had given enough opportunities and space for the couple to develop. As for Lanyu, he didn't have any other skills, but he could cook. He just wanted to see if he could capture Qin Chen's appetite. Mr. Lan chuckled. Little Rongyu's little hand held onto Lan Er's big palm. He was thinking, this grandpa looks as stupid as Lan Er, but he's quite cute. He seems to like me very much. It couldn't be helped. He was so cute that no one seemed to dislike him. What to do? He was going to be a lawyer when he grew up. He didn't want to rely on his looks like a sissy. However, before becoming a lawyer, it was still better to rely on his looks. The adult and the child held hands and went to the park affectionately. Lan Yu's eyes were a little hot as he watched. He hadn't seen his father so happy in a long time. He liked Rongyu very much. At this moment, Qin Chen said calmly, "Don't think about leaving Rongyu here. He is my son and he needs to receive the most advanced education." Lan Yu glanced at her indifferently. "You think too much." He took the car keys. "Let's go." "Where are we going?" Qin Chen was stunned. Lan Yu had already gotten into the car. "Didn't you hear? There's no one at home to cook and we don't have any ingredients. We have to go to a supermarket." Qin Chen refused. "I don't want to walk." Lan Yu's eyes were a little deep. "If you don't want to walk, I can use a cart to push you later." Qin Chen stared at him. "Get in the car. It won't be very tiring. Half an hour will be enough." His tone softened. If one listened carefully, it actually sounded like he was coaxing. Qin Chen stood for a while but still got in the car. Chapter 2998. Qin Chen got in the car in the end. She got in the car and looked at him indifferently. "I'm just watching from the side." Lan Yu smiled but didn't say anything. He started the car, looked at the GPS and chose the nearest supermarket. The car arrived in less than 10 minutes. Lan Yu unbuckled his seatbelt and looked at Qin Chen. "Why don't you get out?" Qin Chen didn't move and played with his fingernails. "I'll wait for you in the car." Lan Yu's eyes were unfathomable. He turned off the engine and got out of the car. Qin Chen was anxious. She unbuckled her seatbelt and got out of the car. "Lan Yu, you bastard." Was he trying to kill her by turning off the engine? Lan Yu walked in front. "Yeah, I'm a bastard, so I don't have to care about your feelings, do I?" Qin Chen was furious, but she couldn't do anything about it. She could only follow behind him. She rarely came to a place like the supermarket, so she didn't expect there to be so many people. There were a lot of people coming and she was pushed to the side. Her feet were still injured, so she was quickly separated. One hand caught her and she was placed in front of him. He put one hand on her waist and said coldly, "You're so stupid. What's the use of being so tall?" Qin Chen was speechless and looked at him. Lan Yu lowered his head and put his chin on her hair so that she couldn't see him. However, this posture was too intimate. Qin Chen wasn't used to it and wanted to break free. "You'd better not move," Lan Yu said in a low voice. "Don't move." Qin Chen was stunned. She felt something about him that couldn't be ignored. She gritted her teeth and said, "Mr. Lan, which girl are you looking at?" Lan Yu smiled and said, "The girl in front of me." Qin Chen was even more furious, but he couldn't do anything about it. Just like that, he was hugged by him and walked into the supermarket. Since there weren't many people inside, his shameful desire to see her was gone. He let go of her, picked up the shopping cart and raised his eyebrows. "Didn't you say your feet hurt? Come on up." Qin Chen was more than 170 centimeters tall. How could he have the face to stand on it? "There's no need," she said faintly. She followed beside him and watched him choose the ingredients. Obviously, Lan Yu was someone who often cooked, so he was very picky. Qin Chen could hardly recognize those green vegetables, but she secretly felt that it was amazing that he could tell them apart. Lan Yu picked at random and asked her softly, "Is there anything you want to eat?" "Anything for me," she said naturally, walking beside him. Lan Yu picked up a box of pork ribs and looked at her. "Where's Rongyu? Is there anything he likes to eat?" "Braised pork ribs and kung pao chicken. He likes them very much." When it came to his son's food, Qin Chen would not disagree with him. After all, he was the one who cooked. Lan Yu looked at her and seemed to be thinking about something. "I think it's a little strange that you know what your son likes to eat." "Qin Chen." Lan Yu smiled and took the ingredients she said. He bought a big shrimp and said, "Make a fried shrimp strip. Children like it." Chen looked down. Lan Yu smiled and continued to walk forward. Although it was only a meal, he still personally picked out some nourishing tonics for Papa Lan, filling the car with them. Chapter 2999. Chen smiled and casually took a bottle of condensed milk and put it in. Lan Yu's lips curled into an almost invisible smile as he continued pushing the cart forward. After a while he was ready to pay the bill. When he was paying the bill, Lan Yu calmly took a few boxes of tea and put them in the cart. Chen looked at him. "Are you using it or your dad?" His face darkened. "What do you think? My mom is not around, who will my dad use it with?" In other words, he wanted to use it with her. Chen didn't say anything and secretly took a look. Large, banana-flavored. He really had a heavy taste. Although this was something between husband and wife, Chen was still a little resistant. After all, he was a stranger. She cleared her throat. "Put it in the car later, don't mix with them." Lan Yu smiled. His long and narrow eyes had the unique charm of a mature man, but he didn't say anything. When the cashier lady scanned the QR code, Chen turned his face to the side and deliberately didn't look. It was so embarrassing. Lan Yu glanced at her. Then when it was time to pay, he said calmly, "The money is in the car, Chen pay." Chen almost exploded. He did it on purpose. But with so many eyes watching, she couldn't search him, so she could only use her phone to pay. After paying, her face was extremely hot. Lan Yu pushed the cart out and she didn't want to follow. When they got to the car, he let her get in and put the things in the trunk one by one. After sitting in the car, he asked deliberately, "How much is it? I'll pay you back." "No need." Chen was angry. Lan Yu took out his wallet and gave her 2,000 yuan. "Take it." He did it on purpose. He clearly had the wallet on him and he was telling her now. Chen turned her head angrily and ignored him. Lan Yu smiled, kept the money and started the car. When he arrived at Father Lan's villa, Father Lan Xianhua had yet to return. Chen sat on the sofa. "Go and cook. I want to rest for a while. My dad asked you to keep an eye on him." After Lan Yu put down the ingredients, he actually came over and carried her to the kitchen. Chen exclaimed, "Lan Yu, what are you doing?" He placed her on the countertop, his body stuck between hers. She did not dare to move, afraid that his animal instincts would explode. Lan Yu smiled. "Isn't the tea in the car? I can't do anything." He let go of her and went to deal with the ingredients. He lowered his head and said softly, "I'm also afraid that if my dad finds out, he'll be traumatized when he eats." Chen snorted softly. "Are you always so shameless?" The knife in his hand slowed down a little and then he looked up at her. After a long time he said softly, "Yes, I used to chase after you shamelessly in the past. But in the end you still chased after someone else." Chen's throat tightened, feeling an indescribable feeling. She shifted a little, her gaze becoming gentler. "Then why are you still chasing after me? Lan Yu, can't you just let nature take its course?" This was the most gentle they had ever been together. Lan Yu's fingers paused for a long time before he said softly, "I guess it's because I can't take it lying down either." With that said, he continued cooking. Chapter 3000. She just watched like that and didn't feel bored. Sometimes she would say a few words to Lan Yu and sometimes she would say a few words to him. As they chatted, she didn't find him annoying anymore. As for Father Lan, he was like a god. When Lan Yu prepared lunch, he finished showing off and came back to eat. When he saw the table full of dishes, he laughed and said, "You're showing off your skills. I don't see you working so hard usually." Lan Yu washed his hands and went upstairs to take a shower. After changing into a set of clothes, he said, "I don't see you talking so much usually." Father Lan laughed and thought about how Lu Wei had been with him for half a year and hadn't seen him bring anyone back for a meal. It was always in the restaurant. After all, Chen was different in his heart. Papa Lan chuckled as he thought of this. Xiao Rongyu was very satisfied with Lan Er's cooking. His small eyes rolled and he felt that it was not a loss for his mommy to find this man. It would be best if she could bring him a burden over. Everyone was happy during the meal, especially Chen, who ate a lot. She thought that if she ate like this every day, she probably wouldn't have to be a model anymore. Which supermodel would wear a circle of fat on the runway? So after the meal, even though her feet hurt, she still endured the pain and went for a walk to digest her food. Xiao Rongyu ate a little more and lay down to take a comfortable nap with her little belly propped up. Father Lon watched over her lovingly. Lon Yu was really busy with work, so he used a wireless laptop to work at home. When Qin Qin came back, he was still focused on the screen. Qin Qin didn't want to spend time with him, so he wanted to run away but was stopped by Lon Yu. "Help me make a cup of tea." Qin Qin blinked. Lon Yu looked at her. "Is there a problem?" She shook her head and went to the kitchen. It wasn't easy for her to find tea leaves and help him make it. He seemed to be very thirsty. He didn't care about the heat and took a sip. Qin Qin looked at him and said, "If there's nothing else, I'm going to rest." Lon Yu looked at her and said slowly, "Rong Yu is with my father. You can sleep in my room, the one on the east side of the second floor." Qin Qin didn't say anything and went upstairs. Upstairs, she pushed the door open. His bedroom was a male bedroom. It was mainly gray, and it looked like he stayed there occasionally because there was a set of clothes from early summer on the bed. It should have been left behind by Lon Yu. She took the clothes to the sofa and lay down. There was also a masculine scent at the tip of his nose, as well as the scent of shower gel. It was the same scent that Lon Yu had in the villa. This smell made her feel somewhat at ease, and she unconsciously fell asleep. When he woke up, the pure masculine aura was even stronger. She opened her eyes and looked at the man on top of her. Lon Yu was kissing her. Qin Qin murmured, "Are you done with your work?" Because of the lack of sleep, her mind was still a little unclear, so it was particularly soft. Lon Yu nodded and kissed her lips absent-mindedly. "We did it once." He was originally angry with her, but today was a little too beautiful. So when he went back to the room to get a document, he saw her lying in his bedroom unguarded, and all his desires were aroused. Qin Qin was a little uncomfortable being kissed by him, but she still didn't forget to refuse him. "Well, weren't we in the car?" He kissed her for a moment and smiled. "I brought it here." Saying that, he put one hand on her hand and whispered, "Put it on for me." Chapter 3001. Qin Qin turned her face to the side, which was a little red and hot. She said in a low voice, "Is this the only hobby you have left? If I don't do anything when my wife is lying on my bed, then I'm pretty much useless." Lon Yu's voice was low, and if one listened carefully, they could even hear a chuckle in it. Qin Qin was very angry, but she was being touched by him like that. She wasn't cold, so she naturally felt it. After a while, he came deep and shallow, and she could be considered to be cooperative. Because there was no coercion, this time it was especially touching. Lon Yu's face was slightly twisted, and he held her face with both hands and kissed her lightly. As he kissed, he said in a low voice, "You also miss me, don't you?" Although they had done it before, it seemed that this was the first time they had reunited. Water and dew blended. Just when the two of them were in love, Lon Yu unilaterally thought. His phone rang. Lon Yu didn't care and continued to do it regardless. Qin Qin was obviously distracted, and she turned her head to look at his phone. Her voice was a little intermittent. "Lon Yu, your phone?" Lon Yu pressed her down and said warmly, "Pick it up after we're done." With that said, he continued. The phone also continued to ring one after another. He wanted to take the phone and turn it off, but when he saw that it was Lin Cece, he picked it up and said in a slightly breathless voice, "Cece, what's the matter?" Qin Qin was originally nervous, but when she heard him call Cece, she was in no mood at all. She turned her head and closed her eyes slightly. However, Lon Yu didn't stop, and he continued to talk to Lin Cece. On the other side, Lin Cece cried softly, "Lon Yu, I've caused trouble." Lon Yu closed his eyes slightly and enjoyed it. After a while, he asked in a hoarse voice, "What's wrong?" Lin Cece cried even more fiercely, but her voice was a lot lower. "Lon Yu, I accidentally burned down the nursing home." Lon Yu had finally tasted the feeling of 1,000 miles of venting. After a while, he kissed Qin Qin and said gently, "I'll go take a look." Cece burned down the sanatorium. She's scared now. Qin Qin lay still. After a long time, she said softly, "Is there no one else in the sanatorium? Lon Yu, are you going to rush over every time?" He paused for a moment before forcing a smile. "Qin Qin, I actually don't need to explain to you, but I still want to tell you that I don't have any thoughts about Cece." "I hope you do," Qin Qin said coldly and sat up. Lon Yu did not move aside. Qin Qin frowned. "Move your little bean teeth away." The author laughed unkindly. Lon Yu's face darkened as he gritted his teeth. "Little bean sprout? Qin Qin, can you say that again?" "Isn't it?" Qin Qin sneered. Lan Yu's face darkened as he stared at her. You'll suffer next time. Qin Chen snorted. You'd better go and comfort your little idiot. His face darkened even more. He got up and pulled up his trousers. After tidying himself up, he looked at Qin Chen. She did not say anything. She also sat up slightly at the head of the bed. Her face was a little red. It was brought about by love. He didn't know why, but he felt a little guilty looking at her. This was probably the bad habit of all men. He said in a low voice, "Wait for me to come back." Qin Chen looked at him without saying anything. Lan Yu pursed his thin lips and finally left. Chapter 3002. He turned his head and looked into her eyes. Qin Chen snorted softly, looking fierce. Lan Yu smiled, picked up the pillow in a good mood and put it back. She still ignored him. He paused. "Qin Chen, you're like a child who can't get candy." She glared at him. Lan Yu chuckled. This time he really left. "You pig who can't control yourself." Qin Chen snorted. She wasn't in the mood to lie down anymore, so she went to the bathroom to take a shower. Her feet still hurt, but she endured the pain, took a shower and changed her clothes. Lan Yu didn't leave immediately. Instead he went to explain to his father. Father Lan obviously didn't agree. He loved Lin Sisi, but now that his son had finally brought Qin Chen back, he abandoned Qin Chen for Lin Sisi. Did he still want to get a wife? Lan Yu smiled faintly. "Dad, I can't leave Sisi alone. Is there no one else besides you?" Father Lan was unhappy. "Think about Qin Chen's feelings." His words made Lan Yu silent. After a long time he said in a low voice, "Dad, I'm already very concerned about her feelings." He paused for a moment before continuing, "I didn't marry her to love her." Father Lan was furious and snorted. "You're getting more and more duplicitous. Fango. When you regret it, don't come to me and cry." He despised his son. Previously he hadn't seen Lu Wei's parents for a long time, but now he was bashful. In his opinion, Lin Sisi was important, but Lan Yu's departure was obviously to make things difficult for Qin Chen or himself. He said he hated him, but at the same time he was afraid that he would care too much. Lan Yu took the car key and left. Father Lan sighed. At this time Rong Yu, who had been pretending to be asleep, opened his eyes. His little face was adorable and his eyes were wide open as he looked at Father Lan. Father Lan's heart was about to melt. No matter whose seed it was, this was his great-grandson. Xiao Rong blinked her adorable eyes and looked at Papa Lan. "Is Uncle Lan going to cheat on me?" Father Lan's old face stiffened, and he scolded his son in his heart. How was he going to explain this to the little cutie now? Could she say that her son had been taking care of Lin Sisi? Although it was a pure relationship, if a man and a woman said that there was no warmth between them, who would believe it? Even he didn't believe that his son, who had been a monk for so many years, wouldn't be moved by Lin Sisi's pretty face. Even if it was an opportunity, he would at least take advantage of it. Therefore, Papa Lan did not have the confidence to explain to Rong Yu. Finally, he coughed lightly and said, "It's hard to say. You can ask your mother." As a mother, she would never let her son know these little secrets, so Papa Lan was confident. Father Lan cheered for himself and applauded for himself. He had pushed the blame so beautifully. However, he never expected that Xiao Rongyu would ask Qin Chen in the afternoon. Qin Chen drank a mouthful of juice and glanced at Father Lan. Father Lan's eyes were filled with certainty. Under Lan Yu's determined gaze, Qin Chen slowly said, "Rongyu, Uncle Lan and Lin Sisi have always been together. Your mother is the mistress." Father Lan was stunned by this answer and was momentarily at a loss for words. Xiao Rongyu asked anxiously, "Mom, what do you mean by mistress?" Chapter 3003. Xiao Rongyue nodded, indicating that he was relieved. Then he raised his little face. "Then should Mom find a mistress to piss Uncle Lan off?" Qin Chen looked surprised. "There's no need for that." Her son carefully observed her expression and then said softly, "But I think Mom is angry at Uncle Lan. Was Mom really forced to be a mistress?" Qin Chen glared at his son. Father Lan was satisfied. Son Zaya was really smart. Qin Chen glanced over again and Father Lan shut up. He had to keep a low profile. After all, it was his son's fault for finding another girl. Lan Yu was stunned when he arrived at the sanatorium. The place that had been fine was now pitch black. The fire engine was still there to deal with the aftermath, and the director and doctors were standing on the lawn outside. Lin Cece, who had caused the trouble, was also standing there. Her little face was as dark as a black egg and only her eyes were moving. When she saw Lan Yu coming over, she pounced over like a little animal looking at its mother. He almost called him Mom. Lan Yu's face was a bit dark. He frowned and looked down at her. Were you scolded? Although he wanted to scold her, he couldn't bear to see her pitiful look. He reached out and touched her little head. Lin Cece whimpered and pounced in his arms. The director came over and said that it was also a headache. Cece was simply a devil in human form. Wherever she went, she caused trouble. In the past 3 years, the hospital had been flooded twice and burned 3 times. Fortunately, there were no casualties. It was really a headache. Fortunately, they had President Lan's sponsorship. Otherwise, no sanatorium could afford to take care of Lin Cece. The director sighed. I can't stay here for a few months again. Fortunately, there haven't been many patients these years. He looked at Lan Yu. Can you let President Lan take care of Cece for a while? You see, we really can't do anything about it. He was afraid that Lan Yu would be unhappy and not give the money, so he pulled himself together. Well, let's fix the house and bring Cece back. What do you think, President Lan? He looked at Lan Yu longingly. Just a few months, let them live comfortably for a few months, right? Lan Yu felt helpless. Looking at the little fellow in his arms, he felt both angry and amused and even a little heartache. An unwanted child. He thought for a moment and said, I'll pick him up. Hurry up here. The dean wiped his sweat and smiled. Of course, we will do it as soon as possible. He would definitely drag it out as soon as possible. It would be best if the 2-month construction period could be extended to half a year. The dean thanked the fire for sending little troublemaker away. Next he could really drink tea. Dream on. Lan Yu looked over and said calmly, I'm married, so it'll be 2 months at most. The dean was stunned. Are they married? He hurriedly said, then let us take care of Cece. President Lan, you're married. How inconvenient is this? If Cece ran over and caused President Lan to divorce, then their sanatorium would probably be finished. Therefore, the dean tried his best to invite Cece to stay. How about changing my office into Cece's ward? I'll take care of her myself. What do you think, President Lan? Lan Yu looked at Lin Cece. Cece, are you willing to do that? Lin Cece bit her lip. She thought of the pigeons in the square, so she whispered, I want to move out. Lan Yu thought for a moment and agreed. Well, come to my place for 2 months. He knew in his heart that it wasn't that there was no place for him to stay. He just wanted to see Chen. Chapter 3004. When Lan Yu returned to the villa with Lin Cece, he remembered that Chen and Rong Yu were still at his father's house. Lin Cece sat on the sofa and watched TV. He took out his phone and called Chen. Are they still at my father's place? Chen said in a low voice, Rong Yu is asleep. I'll bring him back in a while. I'll pick you up. Lan Yu's voice was calm. Chen refused, I'll drive back myself. You have 2 cars here. Lan Yu frowned, but he didn't say anything after looking at Lin Cece. He didn't feel at ease leaving her at home. At this time it was already evening and the sky was about to turn dark. Lan Yu stuffed a bag of snacks to Lin Cece and let her eat them while he went to the kitchen to cook. While cooking, he thought that Chen didn't know when she would come back, so he planned to call her after cooking and tell her that Cece was here. She was probably angry, but he wanted to explain it to her and she should listen. Lan Yu thought and smiled faintly. He touched his forehead. He shouldn't have compromised like this. He was thinking about how to torture her, but it seemed that he could only be angry with her, but he couldn't hate her. At about 7 o'clock he had finished cooking. When he was about to serve the dishes, Lin Cece ran over and hugged his waist from behind. Lan Yu, are you ready? She patted her stomach. I'm hungry. Lan Yu smiled and kissed her head. I'll be ready in a while. Lin Cece looked up at him and smiled foolishly. In her heart, Lan Yu was like her mother and she liked him very much. Naturally, she kissed Lan Yu on the cheek. It wasn't a big deal when they were together in the past, but it wasn't the case in Chen's eyes. She knew that Lan Yu didn't marry her because of love. She didn't expect him to be the same as her, but it didn't mean that she could stand her husband kissing another woman in front of her. It was in the villa where they lived. Chen stood quietly. Rong Yu looked at them and then held his mother's hand, sighing, "Mom, you're right. You're not a mistress." Qin Chen smiled and looked at Rong Yu. "Mom will take you back to Grandma's house, okay?" Rong Yu said yes. Although he was very hungry and liked Uncle Lan's cooking, he didn't want to see his mother sad. Although his mother didn't admit it, he could see that she was unhappy. Qin Chen lowered his head and smiled, then looked at the man and woman. At this time Lan Yu looked at them. They looked at each other. Lin Sisi was still hugging Lan Yu's waist. When she saw Qin Chen, she was surprised and scared. She curled up in Lan Yu's arms and whispered, "Is she angry?" Lan Yu didn't push her away and said indifferently, "Maybe." Lin Sisi bit her lip and asked in an even lower voice, "Am I disturbing you? I'll talk to her." Lan Yu patted her head to comfort her. Finally he let go of her and walked to Qin Chen. Qin Chen didn't leave immediately. Instead he said softly, "I don't want to quarrel with Mr. Lan in front of Rong Yu." Lan Yu frowned. "I said that I don't have that kind of feeling for Sisi." Chapter 3005. After Qin Chen said that, she looked at Lin Sisi and then back at Lan Yu's face. "There's really no need for you to bring her back for me to see, and I won't tolerate it. That's it." After saying that, Qin Chen carried his son out, got into his car and started it. She walked away cleanly without any reluctance to leave. Lan Yu stood there and didn't say anything. He just watched them leave, looked at Xiao Rong's disappointed eyes and looked at the back of the car. Finally he calmed down. Lin Sisi bit her lips and walked over. Did I make her unhappy? In her world she couldn't tell the difference between family and love. But she vaguely felt that it was her appearance that made her beautiful sister unhappy. Lin Sisi bit her lips and gathered her courage to say what was in her heart. "Can I stay at Guzai's place?" Guzai? Lan Yu was a little stunned. Guzai and Lin Sisi had only met a few times, but Sisi actually remembered Guzai and wanted to stay at Guzai's house? He looked at Lin Sisi carefully and asked, "Why?" Lin Sisi's heart beat faster and she blinked innocently. "Because he will help me catch pigeons and he will cook delicious food." Lan Yu was relieved. But he still didn't agree because he didn't dare to take the risk. Because he felt sorry for Sisi. She was as innocent as a piece of paper now. If she had feelings for Guzai and Guzai's family didn't agree or Guzai didn't think it through, Sisi would be hurt. But while he was worried about her, he also hated himself. She was obviously very innocent, but he still used her. He used her to test Qin Chen and see if Qin Chen would be angry. But in the end Qin Chen left and the person who was angry seemed to be him. Besides being angry, he was also worried. Lan Yu pursed his lips and let out a long breath. "Let's eat, we'll talk later." Lin Sisi was a little disappointed that he didn't agree, but she didn't dare to mention it again. Now Lan Yu's role was to be the head of the family. If Lan Yu said that she couldn't do something, she wouldn't dare to do it. She was also afraid that Lan Yu would be angry. During the meal she kept asking Qin Chen when she would be back. Lan Yu ate and paused for a moment, then said indifferently, "She won't be back for the time being." Lin Sisi was quite sensitive. She asked, "Does that mean she won't come back if I'm here?" Lan Yu didn't want to talk to her about this, but she kept asking, so he answered directly, "Yes." The little fool was not stupid at all. He added, Then I'll go back to the sanatorium. But I don't want to go back. I don't want the director to take care of me. He's too old." Lan Yu did not know whether to laugh or cry. Her thoughts were transparent to him. He thought for a moment and said, "Let's talk about it in a few days." Sisi was like a child. In fact, it was really nothing. If Qin Chen could understand, Sisi could be their child just like little Rong Yu. Lin Sisi looked at him secretly. She was sure that he would be unhappy if she mentioned it again, so she didn't dare to say anything. At night when she was sleeping, Lan Yu came to see her and left. Lin Sisi took out a pigeon toy from under her pillow and hugged it to sleep. She talked softly when she was sleeping. "Although you are very poor, I still like to be with you." In the other master bedroom, Lan Yu stood in front of the window and smoked. He didn't know that his little fool had also started to fall in love. Chapter 3006. Lan Yu smoked as he looked at his phone. He knew that Qin Chen would be angry, but he still brought Lin Sisi back. For the first time he knew that not only women could be angry but men could also be angry. Outside it suddenly rained. It was a thunderstorm. Lightning flashed across the horizon, tearing through half of the sky. Lan Yu raised his hand to look at his watch, wondering if Qin Chen had arrived home. He was still worried, so he called her. The phone rang a few times, but she didn't answer. He called again, but this time her phone was turned off. He knew that she had probably gone home, but she just didn't want to answer his call. Actually, he didn't want to hear her voice that much, but he was worried. Lan Yu pursed his lips and looked at his phone. In the end, he didn't call her again. On the other side, Lin Cece also took out her phone and carefully called Gu Zai. He had called her last time, but she hadn't called him even once. Although she was a little silly now, she still had the demeanor of a woman and smiled. She dialed Gu Zai's number and Gu Zai picked up very quickly. At this moment, Gu Zai had just come out of the bathroom. He was only wearing a bathrobe and there were still drops of water dripping from his chest. His well-built body was very attractive. He wiped his wet hair with one hand and held his phone with the other. His voice was a little deep. "I'm Gu Zai." The little fool on the other side of the phone was stunned. His voice was really nice. And was it really Gu Zai's voice? Why did he have such a nice voice? Sounded so nice, just like the voice on the radio. Overbearing Sue. It wasn't easy for the little fool to think of this word. She suddenly became bashful. "It's thundering and it's raining. Have you collected the clothes?" Gu Zai was drinking a mouthful of water and suddenly burst out. Collected clothes? What was she saying? But soon he realized that it was the little fool who called him. The little fool. He hadn't seen her for a long time. Gu Zai was stunned and the little fool on the other side of the phone was about to cry. When he didn't speak, she thought he was angry and didn't want to talk to her. Thus the little fool hung up the phone in disappointment. On the other side, Gu Zai looked at his phone a little puzzled. What's wrong with the little fool? Out of worry, he called back. The phone rang, but the little fool was still crying. Even when he heard the phone ring, he didn't want to answer. She bit her lip and hugged herself. The little fool was angry at herself. Why did she call him? Maybe he hated her to death. And maybe he was currently hugging a female seductress and nibbling on her. He didn't like her at all. The silly girl cried while Gu Zai kept on making phone calls. Finally, she picked up and said in a sobbing voice, "Please don't pester me anymore." Gu Zai laughed and patiently coaxed the little fool. "How did I pester you?" The silly girl bit her lip. "You've called me so many times. If you're not pestering me, then what are you?" "Oh, then why did you call me first? Does that count as pestering me?" Gu Zai followed her words and asked. Lin Cece snorted softly. "It doesn't count if I called you." For a moment, Gu Zai didn't know what to say. She didn't play by the rules and was so unreasonable. He should hang up the phone, but his heart was soft and he wanted to see her. Because he could tell that she had been crying. Chapter 3007. Lin Cece froze for a moment. After a long time, the little fool's eyes turned pink. She bit her lips, feeling an indescribable joy. However, the little fool didn't agree to it easily. Instead, she smiled and said, "Are you pestering me?" Gu Zai smiled and casually threw the towel to the side. "Yes, I'm pestering you." Perhaps he was a little lonely and wanted someone to accompany him. At that moment, the little fool called him. He thought that he would be like Lan Yu and take care of her like a little sister. Gu Zai found a very ideal reason for himself and then said with some joy, "I'll pick you up." The little fool was in a difficult position. She didn't want him to know that she was staying at Lan Yu's house, so she said softly, "I'm outside." Gu Zai's face darkened. "Where are you?" "I'll come over immediately." "Don't move. It's best if you find a shop by the road and stand there." The little fool looked around. It was all luxurious decorations in Lan Yu's villa. She said secretly, "Shall we meet at the square?" Gu Zai's tone became stern. "Do you know the way?" "Yes, I do." The little fool smiled. How would she know? But she had money and knew how to hail a taxi. However, she didn't think about it. It was very dark outside and it was raining heavily. She couldn't hail a taxi. She talked to Gu Zai as she walked out of Lan Yu's villa. The thunder rumbled but the rain stopped. The little fool ran out just like that. She only had her phone. Lan Yu didn't know anything. But in such a villa area, how could the little fool walk out? Gu Zai drove to the square and called her number. "Cece, where are you?" Lin Cece looked at the trees around her and was about to cry. "I don't know." Gu Zai closed his eyes and scolded the little fool in his heart. However, he still told her patiently, "Do you have WeChat on your phone? If you do, we can add it and share our location." Lin Cece wanted to say no, but she was afraid that he would scold her, so she carefully said yes. But she hung up and closed her eyes. She didn't know what was wrong with her. He seemed to have learned it. It was as if these things were engraved in her blood and bones. She calmly downloaded WeChat, pulled out her contacts and added Guze. Then she shared her location. Guze received it within a minute. He looked at the phone in surprise. Is Lin Cece better? Otherwise, how could he be so fast? She clearly didn't know anything. He didn't have time to think about it and drove there first. About half an hour later, he found her near Lan Yu's house. Guze was not a fool. He immediately understood. He carried the little fool into the car and glared at her fiercely. "Are you staying at Lan Yu's house?" he asked fiercely, but he couldn't help but pinch her little face. The little fool looked at him as pitiful as a puppy. After a while she cried. "You were the one who said you wanted to eat skewers. You were the one who pestered me to come out. I didn't want to come out at first." She cried so loudly that Guze couldn't do anything about it. He could only stare at her little face and give her a tissue impatiently. The little fool cried as she said, "My feet hurt from walking. Do you still have skewers?" Lan Yu's expression didn't look too good. Well, he started the car. As the car drove, the little fool beside him kept crying. She should have felt annoyed by crying like that, but Guze didn't feel it at all. Chapter 3008. He cleared his throat and said calmly, "What are you crying for? If you cry again, I'll eat you up." "Really?" The little fool suddenly moved his face closer, sticking it to the side of his face. "Where are you going to eat?" The black sports car braked suddenly. The car came to a halt. Guze turned his head over slowly and looked at the fool. The fool didn't seem to notice and was still smiling. She even leaned over and said, "Come and eat, I've just eaten something delicious and fragrant. I'm willing to share it with you." Guze stared at her mouth. It was indeed tempting. His gaze deepened and his body leaned slightly towards her. Initially she was going to let him eat, but when his burning manly scent came closer, she leaned back immediately. Her head hit the back of the seat and it hurt so much that she started tearing up. However, she didn't dare to cry out loud and could only look at him in a daze, crying worthless tears. Guze leaned forward again and said in a low voice, "Are you scared? Didn't you want me to eat you up just now? Where should we eat? Tell me, where do you agree to eat?" She was scared and her tears seemed to have stopped as she looked at him blankly. After a while she said, "Let's just eat." Her eyes were also fixed on his beautiful thin lips, his straight nose and his long and narrow phoenix eyes. He was really good looking. Really good looking, and it would definitely taste good. The little fool happily thought about it and stammered, "Anywhere. Anywhere is fine." Right after she said that, he knocked her on the head and snorted coldly. "What are you thinking about?" Guze sat up straight and looked at her, saying indifferently, "Don't say such things to men casually in the future." "I'm not saying it casually, I'm saying it seriously." Lin Cece pouted and looked at him. In her heart she was still wondering if he would eat her up if she cried a little. However, he was so fierce and she didn't dare to. She had to find an opportunity to cry. The fool's words made Guze furious. However, he thought about it and didn't want to be calculative with the fool. Thus he restarted the car. "Let's go eat skewers." The little fool made an "oh" sound and didn't say anything else. But in her heart she was thinking, if I get drunk, can I stay at his house? After making up her mind, the little fool revealed a sweet smile. Guze drove into the city. When the little fool got out of the car, she suddenly looked at the black sports car and then at Guze. She whispered, "Your car is very expensive, right? I borrowed it." Guze smiled faintly. "It's Lan Yu's." The little fool heaved a sigh of relief. "As long as it's not borrowed from a woman, it's fine." The meaning of her words made Guze's face darken. He was very straightforward, calling him a gigolo. Guze snorted coldly. He almost didn't want to take her to eat skewers. Perhaps sensing his intentions, the little fool immediately hugged his arm tightly. I was wrong. She was so innocent, but Guze's thoughts were not so simple. She must not know how soft her body was and how impulsive it would be for a man to hug her like that. He was also a man who hadn't had a woman for a long time. Guze was surprised to find himself in a sorry state. He was not Lu Shui. It was just that he hadn't been aroused by a woman for a long time. Chapter 3009. He hadn't been aroused by a woman for a long time, but now that she was hugging him he felt something. Guzhe had a strange feeling in his heart and so did his body. He struggled a little but the little fool hugged him even tighter. She was afraid that he would leave her behind or not bring her to eat skewers. Guzhe was helpless. He was also afraid that others would see something wrong with him, so he took off his jacket and put it in front of him so that he wouldn't be discovered. But the little fool didn't know anything. Not only was she curious, she even reached over and asked curiously, "Did you bring a gun?" Guzhe almost couldn't control himself. He glared at her, "Don't touch me or I'll shoot you." The little fool was frightened again and she retracted her hand. It was a gun and it was very hard. She looked at him, "Will you kill me?" Guzhe was amused. He held her hand as they walked and explained, "Yes, so you have to be obedient. Otherwise if I shoot you you'll die. No, it'll be a fate worse than death. Like a roasted pigeon, plucking its feathers before eating it?" The little fool felt that it was delicious just thinking about it and she swallowed her saliva. Guzhe held his forehead and smiled helplessly. She really didn't know anything. But she didn't know that he could say such shameless things to her, and that was actually bullying her. Wasn't the little fool easy to bully? He wasn't a good person and he came out to make her happy. He came out because he wanted to find happiness. So he didn't explain and just stroked her hair. This kind of kissing action made the little fool happy, and she immediately hugged his waist, burying her little face in his chest and said sweetly, "Then I'll pluck your feathers and eat you." Pluck and eat him. Guzhe looked down at a certain part of his body, and he felt a sense of malice rising behind him. But the little fool was so happy and she pulled him everywhere. In the end Guzhe chose a skewer shop and it was very famous. He was dressed in expensive clothes and he looked out of place in the shop. Not only others but even the little fool could see that. She reached out and tugged at his sleeve. "Don't tell me you borrowed these clothes as well?" Guzhe found it funny and said seriously, "I've already borrowed the house. Do you want to go take a look tonight?" "Yes." She smiled, which was exactly what he wanted. As for Guzhe, he was momentarily speechless. Then he said softly, "I'll send you to Lan Yu." Then the little fool lied. Without changing his expression he said, "Big sister is in the villa and she has a cute baby. I don't want to live there." Guzhe raised his eyebrows. "Qinshan lives at his place? Then why did Lan Yu let Lin Sisi stay there? Was he courting death? Or do you think life is too boring?" Lin Sisi looked at Guzhe's expression in a low voice. She was afraid that he would not take her in, so she tugged at him again. "I don't want to live there." "Can you tell Lan Yu that you lack a servant at home?" Guzhe coughed lightly and asked seriously, "What do you know?" "Yes." She thought about it carefully and then said honestly, "I know how to eat, sleep and play games. I'm good at it and I can always clear the game in one go." Guzhe did not find it strange. Lin Sisi was a computer expert in the past and she might not have forgotten that subconsciously. Just like in the past she would be able to locate him very quickly. She was actually not that stupid. Chapter 30:10. Guzhe smiled. "You know a lot of things but I might not have the money to hire you. What do you think I should do?" The fool was stunned. "Is there really no way at all?" She bit her lips and asked him seriously, "You can borrow some from Lan Yu. Just a little will do." Guzhe held back his laughter. "But I still don't have the money." The fool was about to cry as she pouted. "Why are you so poor?" "It's not wrong to be poor." Guzhe couldn't help but laugh as he pinched her cheeks. "Silly girl." The fool was angry as she lowered her head and sulked. She felt that she couldn't back down. At least there was a little bit of pay. Besides, he wasn't that poor. However, Guzhe wasn't going to back down at all. There was no use getting angry. She really didn't want to go, but she felt that it was a good opportunity for them to eat skewers together. Lin Sisi looked up and gave in. "Then I don't want the pay." "Oh no, I mean you owe me." Guzhe called out to the boss and had him send over a portion of the specialty skewers. The little fool immediately forgot about being a nanny and ate with gusto. "It's really delicious." She ate it sweetly, her eyes curved into crescents as she smiled. Guzhe sat opposite her. Looking at the purity in her eyes, his heart softened. He reached out and rubbed her eyelids. The fool smiled and didn't think much of it. She continued to eat. At that moment, Guzé's manly charm couldn't compare to the skewers in his hands. Guzé didn't really like these things, so he only ate a few mouthfuls. He didn't drink as he had to drive her back later. He had never thought of bringing this troublemaker home. However, the fool drank quite a bit. Guzé thought that he would get her drunk and send her to Lanyu so that Lanyu could have a headache. However, he did not expect that Lin Cici's alcohol tolerance was so bad. At first she was sleeping, then she started dancing in the car. She even took off her jacket and underwear. Guzé kept his hands on the steering wheel and tried not to look at the little fool in the back seat. At this moment she was only wearing a singlet and it couldn't be taken off. Her fair arms were particularly attractive in the dim light. In the eyes of a man like Guzé who had been abstinent for a long time, it was like a wolf seeing a piece of meat. It was hard to control. He cleared his throat, but his voice was still hoarse. Cici, put on your clothes. Not only did the silly girl not listen to him, she even moved closer to him and asked softly, "Did I dance well?" She climbed to the front seat with her slender legs and even wanted to climb on top of him. The supercar came to a sudden stop. It was especially ear-piercing on the streets in the middle of the night. Fortunately, it was late at night and after the rain, so there were not many people on the streets. Guzé looked at the little fool in front of him, but at this moment he felt that she was more like a demon. His face was a little dark. "Do you do this with Lanyu at home?" The little fool shook her head blankly and then said something that infuriated him. "I don't know. Does that mean that there might be?" At this moment, the little fool stared at his lips as though she had been salivating for a long time. She stared at him and then bit him. Only the heavens knew that Guzé had thought that she was kissing him. Although she might not be good at kissing, she wasn't biting him. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.